Miss your old familiar friends, but waiting just around the bend. Everywhere you look, there's a hole.
I'm sure most of you have heard already. Tyson Fury says a third bout with Deontay Wilder is off. He was quoted as saying, "I agreed to December 19th. Then they tried to change the date again to next year. I've been training. I'm ready. When they tried moving off December 19th and pushing to next year, enough was enough. I've moved on." Mike Kopinger tweeted, exclusive. Tyson Fury tells The Athletic he's foregoing the Deontay Wilder trilogy after the scheduled December date was pulled. The deadline to reschedule expired Friday. Now, looking for a homecoming bout on December 5th per sources, before mega fight with Anthony Joshua. Mike Kopinger went on to say, Fury had every intention of fighting Wilder again, but the date was moved 3 times and he didn't want to drag this out and delay the Joshua bout. To which Tyson Fury himself replied, "Thanks, Mike Kopinger. The Gypsy King is coming home. See you all in December." I'm going to try to keep this part of the conversation as concise as possible, as this many inferences we've already made in previous videos, that if Tyson Fury is deciding to skip out on the third Wilder fight, it's because legally he's at liberty to do so. Do you think that the people at MTK Global, Frank Warren, and Bob Arum would allow Tyson Fury to be in full breach of a contract just so he could fight a lighter touch in December? No, of course not.
No fucking way.
There's no fucking way they let this guy breach an active contract so he can fight some ham and egg guy in the United Kingdom. But if the contract is expired, if the contract has reached its term limit, well, that's a different story. The last 2 videos I uploaded talking about this subject. You know, I had guys in the comments telling me that I'm jumping the gun. I'm jumping the fucking gun. This is coming from Tyson Fury. This is coming from Bob Arum. This is coming from Frank Warren. Those most associated with the situation. I mean, do you know something that they don't know?
Idiots.
Yeah, that guy trying to wag his fucking finger in my face sermonized to me about how Deontay Wilder has a rematch clause and Tyson Fury can't breach it. Hey, genius, you do realize that contracts have term limits. They have expiration dates, as do the rematch clauses that are incorporated in those contracts. I mean, you understand that, right? It's not a lifelong contract.
Comprendo.
There are term limits, and for all intents and purposes, this contract has reached its term limit. It's the only fucking reason Tyson Fury feels so inclined to fight someone else in December. Because it's the way I told you. The Wilder people want to wait. They want to wait till next year, because by next year, perhaps live audiences, capacity crowds, will return to boxing.
They don't want to miss out on all that potential gate revenue.
And because the term limits don't extend into next year, because the contract itself is set to expire before this year is over, Tyson Fury wants to move on. He's not going to go into a new deal to fight Wilder for a 3rd time if the old contract has expired. He's going to use that as an opportunity to fight some lighter touch, some no-hoper, so he can preserve himself long enough to fight Anthony Joshua. That's what he's doing. That's what I told you in my previous video, and that is what these reports confirm. Now, if you're too fucking stupid to understand this, you're too fucking dense to process this information, do yourself a favor. Do me a favor. Get the fuck away from this channel.
Would you get the hell out of here?
You're too goddamn dumb to understand what it is that I'm telling you, what I am communicating to you. If you can't process this, there's no fucking reason you should take time out of your day to come to this channel and leave those fucking comments for me to read, you fucking nimrods. Understand something. Based on the old contract, Tyson Fury was set to get the lion's share of the pot, 60-40, 40% going to the loser of the second fight, who so activates the rematch clause.
Wilder.
Tyson Fury was set to get a bigger share of the proceeds in the third fight than he did in the second fight, and yet Tyson Fury is choosing to forego the third fight because, like I told you, there's not that much money in the pot. Not as much money as he'd get fighting Anthony Joshua. And that is why he is prioritizing that fight, those fights, for 2021. In order for Tyson Fury to have an interim fight in December and still fight Wilder for a 3rd time thereafter, in what would be the next fight would have to be if Tyson Fury entered into a new deal, and I don't see him doing that.
He wants that Anthony Joshua money.
The gist of it is, Deontay Wilder has been left hanging. He has been left holding the proverbial bag, and I can't say that I feel sorry for him, because I always viewed this Tyson Fury saga as a cherry pick gone wrong for Deontay Wilder. Make no mistake, ahead of that first fight, Tyson Fury had not fought an elite level fighter in about 2 years. This was a guy who was clearly on the rebound, having fought 2 pedestrian level guys in the build-up of the Wilder fight, the first Wilder fight. Wilder didn't pick this guy because he represented the best versus the best or anything of the sort. Quite the opposite. He picked Tyson Fury because it was a good time to pick Tyson Fury, because he was in a vulnerable state.
A cherry.
And look at what happened. The first fight comes and goes, and you got a lot of people saying they scored it for Tyson Fury. The second fight comes around, and he beats you worse in the second fight than he did in the first fight. Tyson Fury was a cherry pick. Gone wrong. At least from where Wilder was sitting, Wilder thought of him as a cherry. A guy recovering from obesity, mental illness, and a cocaine addiction. A guy who's on the rebound, essentially. A guy who is on the mend, trying to reintegrate himself into the sport of boxing. Yes, Deontay Wilder, Shelley Finkel, that whole side of the aisle, they thought of Tyson Fury as a cherry pick. And they felt it an opportune time to fight this cherry. And it all went sideways for them. I mean, look at where we are.
What are we gonna do now?
And the uncharacteristic silence of the otherwise outspoken Deontay Wilder, who in the past was never at a loss for words, lends itself to the overall gravity of this situation, that this guy's not even chiming in. He's not even saying anything, because that's how bad he got beat in that second fight. I mean, yeah, Tyson Fury is bailing on you. He is skipping out on the third fight, but you can't pretend that he's doing that from some fear of what you're going to do in the third fight. You done fought the fucking guy 2 times already. You haven't beat him yet. The guy who you call a feather-fisted pillow puncher, who can't punch. He punched you on the hip and sat you on your back pocket. You act like that didn't happen? I've been telling you guys for a while now that there's not that much interest in a third Wilder versus Fury fight. There just isn't. Don't let these channels on YouTube fool you, okay? There's not that much interest in that fight, and there's not that much money in that fight. And at a time when Tyson Fury actually stands to get the lion's share of the pot, 60%, he's still choosing to walk away because he's acting on that assumption. There's not that much money in that fight, and there is far more money in an Anthony Joshua fight.
I told you guys Wilder's irrelevant.
And I told you that all of this blew up in his face. Forget about the $100 million that DAZN offered him. Before that, when Eddie Hearn offered him $15 million guaranteed at 40% of the upside, he should have taken that deal. He would have made more money off of that deal than this.
Fucked himself right out of that conversation.
And he has no one to blame but himself and his team, as that 2-fight engagement with Anthony Joshua, win or lose, would have been a more lucrative engagement than this has proven to be. Moving on to yet another contract dispute of sorts. The outlawyering of Canelo Alvarez continues on the part of DAZN. Attorneys at DAZN continue to outmaneuver attorneys for Saul Canelo Alvarez in California courts. Alvarez's $280 million lawsuit to free himself from DAZN and Golden Boy is now a month old and hasn't gotten nowhere, as DAZN's newly filed removal papers brought the case right back to where it started. Federal court in the Central District of California. To recap, Alvarez sued in federal court, but failed to identify on a proper basis for filing in federal court instead of state court. The federal court asked Alvarez's attorney to refile the case in 2 weeks. During that 2-week period, the parties attended mediation, but could not resolve their differences. So Alvarez refiled the case in state court. Now DAZN has removed the case back to federal court and signaled that its next move will be to seek dismissal because the contracts at issue require the parties to go to private arbitration rather than any court, state, or federal. A DAZN motion to dismiss will likely be filed this week. Golden Boy will probably file a motion to dismiss of its own. It is unclear why Alvarez's attorneys would file the same lawsuit on two separate occasions and wasted Alvarez's valuable time if both relevant contracts contain arbitration clauses. And even the process of letting the court decide whether the arbitration clauses are enforceable will likely take at least 3 months. Alvarez has not fought since November of 2019. Here is what Alvarez's attorneys will have to overcome in order to avoid having the lawsuit dismissed in favor of arbitration. According to papers filed by DAZN's attorney, the federal court has jurisdiction over this action under the Federal Arbitration Act, a federal law. The DAZN contract with Golden Boy contains dispute resolution provisions which state that A, this agreement and any dispute or claim arising out of or in connection with it or its subject matter or formation, including non-contractual disputes or claims, shall be governed by and interpreted in accordance with the law of England and Wales. Any dispute, controversy, or claim arising out of or in connection with this agreement, whether in tort, contract, under statute, or otherwise, including any question regarding its existence, validity, interpretation, breach, or termination, shall be finally resolved by arbitration under the rules of arbitration of the International Chamber of Commerce. The seat of the arbitration shall be New York, New York. Although more details of the Alvarez grievance appear below, the key fact is that Alvarez is suing DAZN but has no contract with DAZN, which is what the fuck I told you guys. The contract is between DAZN and Golden Boy, with Alvarez having a separate contract with Golden Boy. Alvarez claims he is a third-party beneficiary of the Golden Boy DAZN contract, but that is a very difficult legal argument to win. DAZN papers neatly summed up the dispute as follows. This lawsuit arises out of a three-way dispute between a boxer, plaintiff Saul Canelo Alvarez, his promoter, Golden Boy Promotions, and its affiliates, and a broadcaster, DAZN, consisting of 4 entities. The parties' relationship is governed by 2 separate contracts. One between Alvarez and Golden Boy, governed by the law of the state of Nevada, and one between Golden Boy and DAZN, governed by the law of England and Wales. Each of these contracts contains an arbitration provision requiring the parties' disputes to be resolved by arbitration. In layman's terms, it's an ironclad contract that protects itself, and Canelo Alvarez is subject to it on both fronts. You see, such a provision exists in Canelo Alvarez's contract with Golden Boy. That same provision exists in Golden Boy's contract with DAZN. And Canelo Alvarez is going to have a hell of a hard time wriggling his way out of that when his promoter, who is so empowered to negotiate on his behalf,
By him,
walked him into that situation. The clause quite plainly states that if you've got any kind of an issue, anything at all, it must be settled in arbitration. Layman's terms, settle it amongst yourselves. Canelo Alvarez has sought the court's assistance in determining what should happen, but based on the contract language,
legalese,
that may or may not work, and in the time you're waiting to find out whether or not that will or won't work, could be 3 months. More lost time for a pugilist, more lost time, lost money for a prize fighter who's already been out of the ring since November of 2019. I told you guys, all right? I told you. DAZN can do this all day to Canelo Alvarez, and while they're doing this, he's losing time, he's losing money, and he's getting older. This is an ironclad contract that he's going to have a hell of a hard time getting around, because he is trying to establish blame on DAZN's part, even though DAZN is not to blame for what Golden Boy did. Golden Boy Promotions has the fiduciary duty to Canelo Alvarez, and if by some chance they walked him into some other contract that contradicts their written agreement, then perhaps Canelo can establish a breach of contract on Golden Boy's part, and perhaps he can seek release from his contract with Golden Boy Promotions on that premise. But even if it happened that way, that's not going to get you that $280 million you want from DAZN, because that $280 million is for services rendered, and they haven't actually rendered those services because you haven't completed your end of the bargain. You want money that you haven't even generated yet. Breach, if there is one, would have to be on Golden Boy's part. The breach would have to be that somehow they violated their fiduciary duty to Canelo Alvarez and the contract that they have with each other, because that predates the DAZN deal. So if Golden Boy Promotions walked Canelo Alvarez into a situation that is not in keeping with their initial agreement, then Canelo Alvarez perhaps can substantiate a breach of contract.
With Golden Boy.
You walked into this deal with DAZN, and I'm a part of that deal, but you agreed to things that aren't in keeping with what me and you agreed with. You agreed to those things with them, but I wasn't part of that meeting. I don't have a contract with DAZN. You have a contract with DAZN.
And your contract with DAZN is not in keeping with my contract with you. And my contract with you predates that one. So if you violated this one, I can seek release from it.
That would be the best case scenario for Canelo Alvarez in this situation. The problem is he is so choosing to go after DAZN for certain dollar amounts, and because of that, because that's a part of the lawsuit, that opens the door for DAZN to keep this guy tied up, giving them the runaround, outmaneuvering him with the legalese, the jurisdictions, etc., etc., for quite some time. This is why I said Canelo needs to drop this, okay? Sit down with John Skipper, sit down with Oscar, sit down with Eric Gomez, and iron out something that you're in agreement with. Because DAZN can keep this kid tied up for months, and while he's tied up, he's losing time, he's losing money. Because you're not going to get that $280 million, I can tell you that right now. Even if it works out to where Canelo Alvarez substantiates a breach of contract on Golden Boy Promotions' part, and he is thereby released from his promotional contract with them, that's still not going to get him $280 million. The most he stands to gain from that, the most that would do, is make Canelo Alvarez a promotional and network free agent. Then maybe you can strike a deal of your own with DAZN, without the middleman, without Oscar, without Eric, without Golden Boy Promotions, so that you can thereby negotiate on your own behalf with a platform. Doesn't have to be DAZN, maybe Showtime, maybe Fox, maybe ESPN, whatever your preference, so that Canelo can negotiate on his own behalf and know exactly what it is he's walking into and whether or not it's something he agrees with, because that seems to be his problem. Though if I'm being honest, it is quite unclear here and now as to whether or not Canelo Alvarez can actually constitute a breach of contract, Golden Boy Promotions end of things. I mean, it seems like Canelo Alvarez has been largely in the dark as far as what rights he does and doesn't have. And this lawsuit could end up getting dismissed. It could end up getting thrown out as a result of that this dispute would be better settled in arbitration rather than a court of law.